I never thought I would hear those words spoken about me. Not on a day meant for love, not at my own son's wedding. The music was playing softly in the background. People were laughing. Glasses were clinking. The room was full of light and celebration. And yet, in the middle of all that joy, I stood frozen, holding a glass of water, feeling smaller than I ever had in my life. Dear listeners, before we begin this story, I want to ask you a favor. If my story resonates with your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which city or state you are listening from. It warms my spirit to know how far my voice travels. Happy listening. She didn't know I was standing behind her. My daughter-in-law leaned slightly toward her friends, her voice low but careless. Her smile was sharp, not kind. She said, look at him. He eats like a pig. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it. I hoped I had imagined it. I waited for someone to laugh it off, or correct her, or say something gentle to soften the words, but instead there was a short laugh, a quiet one, the kind people make when they don't want to be heard but don't care enough to stop. My hand began to shake. I placed the glass back on the table so no one would notice. My chest felt tight, my throat felt dry. I wanted to say something, anything, but no sound came out. I looked down at my suit. I had chosen it carefully. Simple dark color, clean, neat, not too expensive, not too plain. I had even practiced how I would sit and eat so I wouldn't embarrass my son on his big day. And yet there I was, reduced to a joke. I slowly stepped back, blending into the crowd, pretending I hadn't heard a thing, pretending it didn't matter. I had learned long ago how to pretend. Life teaches you that skill when you grow up without much. I told myself it's her wedding day. Let it go. I told myself she's nervous. She didn't mean it. I told myself many things that day, but the words stayed with me. I'm not a rich-looking man. I never have been. My hands are rough. My posture is a little stiff. I eat slowly, carefully, because I spent many years learning not to waste food. What she didn't know, what no one at that wedding truly knew, was how much effort it took for me to even be there. I had nearly skipped the wedding, not because I didn't love my son. I loved him more than anything in this world, but because I knew I didn't belong in rooms like that. Big halls, fancy decorations, people who judge you in one glance. Still, I came for him. When I saw my son standing at the altar earlier that day, his eyes shining, his hands trembling slightly, I felt proud. So proud it almost hurt. I thought I did something right, and then just like that, one sentence erased that feeling. I left the reception early. I told my son I wasn't feeling well. He hugged me worried and asked if I needed anything. I smiled and told him I was fine. I told him to enjoy his night. I didn't want to be a shadow over his happiness. On the drive home, I sat in silence. The city lights passed by like quiet witnesses. My mind replayed her words again and again. A pig. I thought about my late wife, how she used to remind me to eat slowly, how she used to laugh when food fell on my shirt, how she never made me feel small. I wondered what she would have said if she were alive. I wondered if she would have told me to confront them, or if she would have held my hand and told me to stay quiet. That night I stood in my kitchen, still wearing my suit, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I barely recognized the man looking back at me. What hurt the most wasn't the insult itself, it was the ease with which it was said, the comfort, the certainty, as if she already knew who I was, but she didn't. And what she could never imagine, what none of them could imagine, was that within weeks I would walk into her father's company as the new CEO, not as a guest, not as a favor, but as the man in charge. At the time, though, standing alone in my quiet house, all I felt was shame and a deep, heavy sadness. I had no idea that life was already turning the page, and when it did, everything would change for all of us. To understand why her words hurt so deeply, you need to understand where I came from. I was not born into comfort. I was born into survival. I grew up in a small house where walls were thin and money was thinner. My father worked long hours and came home tired and quiet. My mother stretched meals so far that even hunger learned patience. We did not complain. Complaining was a luxury we could not afford. From a young age, I learned to eat carefully, slowly. You did not rush food when it might be the last decent meal of the week. You respected it. You made it last. Those habits never left me. School was not easy, but it was my escape. I studied when others slept. I worked when others rested, not because I was ambitious, but because I was afraid, afraid of becoming stuck, afraid of failing before I even began. I married young, too young, some said, but your heart does not wait for perfect timing. My wife was gentle in a way the world was not. She saw me, truly saw me, even when I did not see much in myself. When our son was born, I felt fear and joy at the same time. Fear because I did not know if I was enough. Joy because suddenly life had a clear purpose. I promised myself one thing that day: my son would never feel small. I worked many jobs over the years, some paid well, some barely paid at all. I wore the same coat for winters longer than I should have. I skipped meals so he wouldn't have to. I learned to smile even when my body was tired beyond words. My wife used to tease me gently. "You take life too seriously," she would say. Maybe she was right, but life had taught me seriousness early. Then she got sick. It happened slowly, then all at once. Hospital visits became part of our routine. Smiles became harder to find. When she passed away, something inside me went quiet, not broken, just quiet. From that moment on, it was just my son and me. I did my best, I really did, but grief makes you clumsy. It makes you miss things. I was there physically, but sometimes my mind was still stuck in hospital rooms and old memories. Still, my son grew into a good man, kind, curious, hardworking. When he told me he was getting married, I felt both happiness and fear. Happiness because he had found love, fear because I knew how the world could be. The first time I met his future wife, she was polite, that kind of polite that sits on the surface. She smiled, she asked questions, she thanked me for dinner. But her eyes moved quickly, scanning everything. She came from a very different background. Her family was wealthy, not just comfortable wealthy. Big house, expensive cars, loud confidence. Her father was known in business circles. People spoke his name with respect, sometimes with fear. I was careful around them. I spoke less. I listened more, old habits again. At family dinners, I noticed small things. The way she corrected waiters, the way she spoke about people like that. The way she joked about things that were not meant to be jokes. But I stayed quiet. I didn't want to cause tension. I didn't want my son caught between two worlds. I told myself that love would soften her over time. That marriage changes people. When the wedding planning began, I offered help. I did not have much to give, but I gave what I could. I paid for a small part of the ceremony. I told my son it was my honor. He hugged me tightly. "You've already done enough, Dad," he said. That moment stayed with me. As the wedding day approached, I felt nervous. Not about the ceremony, about myself, about how I would look, how I would speak, whether I would say the wrong thing. I practiced conversations in my head. I reminded myself to smile, to keep my back straight, to eat neatly. Yes, even that. On the wedding morning, I stood alone in my room and adjusted my tie again and again. I whispered my wife's name, asking her to watch over us, to guide me, to keep me calm. Ceremony itself was beautiful. My son looked confident. His bride looked radiant. When they said their vows, I felt tears form in my eyes. I did not wipe them away. I did not care who saw. I believed that day was about love. That belief carried me through the ceremony, through the photographs, through the congratulations. It carried me until the reception, until her voice cut through the noise. After I left early that night, I did not tell anyone what had happened. Not my son, not my relatives. I carried it alone the way I had carried many things before. Days passed, then weeks. Life returned to its quiet rhythm: work, home, silence. I thought the pain would fade. I thought it would become another memory I learned to live with. What I did not know was that something else was unfolding behind the scenes, something tied to my past, something tied to choices I had made quietly, patiently, without recognition. You see, while I never chased attention, I did chase excellence. I studied business not for status, but for stability. Over the years, I had advised companies quietly, helped rebuild struggling firms, fixed problems others avoided. I never talked about it. I never needed to. And somewhere along the way, without my son or his new wife knowing, I had crossed paths with her father professionally. At the time, I was just a name on paper to him. But that was about to change. And when it did, the balance of power would shift in ways none of us were prepared for. After the wedding, life returned to its familiar silence. That silence had been my companion for many years, so I did not fear it. In fact, I trusted it more than noise. Noise often hides truth. Silence lets it breathe. I went back to my routines: early mornings, simple meals, long walks when my thoughts grew heavy, and work, always work. Work was the one place where the world made sense to me. People often assume success is loud, that it comes with big offices and shining smiles. But most of my work happened quietly, in small rooms, over long calls, with documents spread across worn desks. I had spent years building a reputation without building a name. After my wife passed, I needed something steady, something that did not depend on emotions. So I leaned into learning finance, operations, leadership, not the kind you see in books with bold titles, but the kind that listens more than it speaks. I worked as a consultant, though I never liked that word. I helped struggling companies survive. I helped failing systems breathe again. I was called when things were already broken. I never asked for credit. I only asked to be useful. That mindset followed me everywhere. I wore simple clothes to meetings. I arrived early. I took notes by hand. People often underestimated me. They thought I was an assistant or a junior advisor. I let them think that. Underestimation is a powerful gift if you know how to use it. Years ago, I was brought in to review a mid sized company that had grown too fast. The leadership was proud, confident, a little careless. Profits were high, but foundations were weak. The company belonged to a group owned by a man I had never met in person, a powerful man, well known, respected, feared even. That man was my daughter in law's father. At the time, I did not know that. I only knew the company needed help. I spent weeks reviewing numbers, processes, staff morale. I saw the cracks beneath the polish. I wrote a report, clear, honest, uncomfortable. Most people would have softened it. I did not. I sent it directly to the board. Days later, I received a call. The voice on the other end was calm but firm. "This is thorough," the man said. "Who exactly are you?" I told him my name, just my name, no titles. There was a pause. "You don't sound like someone who enjoys attention," he said. "I enjoy solutions," I replied. That was our first real conversation. Over the next few years, we spoke occasionally. Not often, only when needed. He respected directness. I respected clarity. We did not become friends. We became something better, professionally honest. Still, he did not know my personal life. He did not know I had a son. He did not know his daughter would one day marry him. And I did not know how deeply his world and mine would collide. After the wedding incident, I focused even more on work, not to escape, but to steady myself. Hurt has a way of sneaking into quiet moments. Keeping busy helped me breathe. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call. The same voice, calm, measured. "We need to talk," he said. There was no urgency in his tone, but I felt something shift inside me. Experience teaches you to hear between words. We met in a private conference room, no assistants, no ceremony. He looked tired, older than before. Success carries weight, and it had begun to show on him. He got straight to the point. "I'm stepping back," he said. "Health reasons. The board needs someone steady, someone who can clean what I can't anymore." I listened. I did not interrupt. "We want you as CEO," he continued. For a moment, the room felt very still. I had been offered roles before, high-level ones, but this was different. This was not a title. This was responsibility at the highest level. "I need time," I said carefully. He nodded. I expected that. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The same table where I had once helped my son with homework. The same place where my wife used to drink tea. I thought about power, about money, about what it changes in people, and I thought about the wedding, not out of revenge, out of clarity. I realized something important that night. Respect should never depend on position, but position reveals truth. I accepted the offer a week later, quietly, no announcement yet, no celebration, just preparation. The board wanted a transition period. The public announcement would come later. Until then, only a few people knew. I continued living the same way, same house, same routines, same quiet. My son called occasionally. He sounded happy, busy, adjusting to married life. I listened, I encouraged. I did not mention work. His wife spoke to me less. When she did, it was polite, distant. She never mentioned the wedding comment. Neither did I. Some wounds don't need reopening. They need understanding. Weeks passed. Then came the call that would change everything. My son invited me to dinner, said it was important, said her parents would be there. I agreed, not knowing that the room I was about to walk into would hold more truth than anyone was ready to face. That night, as I ironed my shirt, I felt calm, truly calm, not nervous, not angry, just present. I did not plan to reveal anything. I did not plan to confront anyone. I only planned to be myself. Life, however, had its own plans. And soon the woman who had called me a pig would look at me very differently, not because I demanded respect, but because truth had finally arrived at the table. The evening of the dinner arrived quietly, no warning signs, no heavy feelings in the air, just another invitation that sounded ordinary on the surface. My son said her parents wanted to get together, to spend time as family. His voice was hopeful, a little nervous. I could hear it even through the phone. I told him yes without hesitation. That afternoon, I prepared the way I always did, slowly, carefully. I chose a simple shirt and a clean jacket, nothing expensive, nothing careless. I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual, not out of vanity but habit. Old habits do not leave easily. As I buttoned my shirt, I reminded myself of something my wife once said. People show who they are when they think no one is watching. I did not know then how true that would be. The restaurant was elegant but not loud, soft lighting, quiet music. The kind of place where people speak gently even when they do not feel gentle inside. I arrived early. Of course I did. I sat at the table and waited. I folded my hands. I breathed slowly. I watched other families talk and laugh. I wondered what kind of family we were becoming. My son and his wife arrived first. He smiled when he saw me, that same smile he had as a child. It never changed. She nodded politely. Light smile, her eyes moved around the room, assessing, measuring. Dad, thank you for coming, my son said. Of course, I replied, I'm glad to be here. A few minutes later, her parents arrived. Her mother was warm in a practiced way. Friendly words, gentle laughter. Her father entered with confidence, not loud, not rushed, the kind of confidence built over decades. When our eyes met, there was a pause, a small one, almost unnoticeable. He looked at me closely, not casually, not politely. But carefully, I stood and offered my hand. Good evening, I said. He took my hand firmly. His grip tightened for just a second longer than normal. His eyes narrowed slightly, then softened. I didn't realize you were, he began, then stopped himself. He smiled. Please, he said, sit. That was the first shift. No one else noticed it. Not my son, not his wife, but I felt it. As we sat, conversation flowed easily at first. Wedding memories, travel plans, work updates, small talk. Safe topics. Her mother talked about the wedding decorations. Her father spoke about business expansion plans in vague terms. My son listened eagerly. His wife spoke confidently. She laughed easily. She talked about goals, about image, about success. She did not look at me much. When the waiter arrived, everyone ordered confidently. She ordered without looking at the menu for long. I took my time. I always do. I felt her glance at me, just for a second. Old instinct, old judgment. I ordered something simple. As we waited for the food, her father turned slightly toward me. You work in consulting, correct? He asked. Yes, I replied. He nodded slowly. That's broad. It is, I agreed. He studied me again, not with arrogance, with curiosity. And before that, he asked. I've done many things, I said, mostly fixing problems. He smiled at that, a genuine one. That sounds familiar, he said. The food arrived. Plates were set down gently. Glasses refilled. As I lifted my fork, I noticed her watching me again, not openly, from the corner of her eye. I ate the way I always had, slowly, carefully, respectfully. She looked away. Conversation shifted to business again. Her father spoke about leadership challenges, about trust, about the difficulty of letting go. I'm stepping back more these days, he said. Health has a way of changing priorities. Her eyes widened slightly. Dad, you never told me that, she said. He waved it off. Nothing serious. Just time, then he turned to me. Sometimes, he said, you need someone steady to take over, someone who doesn't need applause. There was a pause. I agree, I said quietly. My son looked between us, confused but interested. Her father nodded, satisfied. I've always believed the quiet ones see the most, he added. Her smile faltered slightly. She shifted in her chair. Dad, she said lightly, you always talk like it's a board meeting. He smiled at her, but his eyes stayed on me. Some meetings matter more than others, he replied. I said nothing. The air felt different now, not tense, just aware. After dinner, coffee was ordered, desserts discussed. I declined dessert, not because I didn't want it, but because I was full, she noticed. Again, her father leaned back slightly. I'm glad you could all be here, he said. Family is important, especially when worlds start overlapping. My son laughed. What worlds? Her father did not answer immediately. He looked at me. We'll talk soon, he said quietly. I nodded. When the bill arrived, I reached for it instinctively. Old habit. Her father placed his hand over mine. No, he said. Tonight, I insist. I did not argue. As we stood to leave, her mother hugged everyone. When she hugged me, she whispered, You seem like a very kind man. I thanked her. Her father shook my hand again, firm, respectful. Her eyes followed the exchange closely now. On the way out, my son walked beside me. Dad, he said, everything okay? Yes, I replied honestly. Everything is fine. His wife walked slightly ahead with her parents. She did not look back. That night when I returned home, I did not feel heavy. I did not feel angry. I felt grounded. The truth was beginning to surface, not through confrontation, but through presence. The next morning, my phone rang. It was her father. "We need to move forward with the announcement," he said. "I understand," I replied. "There will be a board meeting," he continued, "then internal communication, then public." "Yes," he paused. "You didn't tell your family," he said. "No," I replied. Another pause. "Good," he said. "Let's see who listens when they're not warned." I ended the call and stood by the window for a long time. I thought about the wedding, the words spoken behind my back, the judgment passed without knowledge. I felt no desire for revenge, only clarity. The table had been set, the pieces were in place. And soon the truth would walk into the room, quietly, respectfully, and without apology. The day of the announcement arrived without drama. No thunder, no warning signs, just another morning that looked ordinary from the outside. I woke up early, as I always did. The sky was pale and quiet. I made myself a simple breakfast and ate slowly, sitting at the same small table I had used for years. Nothing in my house suggested power or position. There were no reminders of importance, only memories. As I finished my tea, I thought about how strange life can be, how two truths can exist at the same time. In one world, I was just an old man who had been quietly insulted at a wedding. In another, I was about to step into a role that would change how many people looked at me. Neither world fully defined me. I dressed carefully but simply. A clean suit, well pressed, no expensive watch, no signs meant to impress. I did not want attention, I wanted clarity. When I arrived at the office building, people greeted me politely. Some nodded, some smiled, some barely noticed me. That was fine. The announcement had not been made yet. The boardroom was already prepared, chairs neatly arranged, bottles of water placed evenly, screens ready. Everything looked controlled, orderly. Inside, I felt calm. The board members arrived one by one, familiar faces, serious expressions, quiet conversations. I had worked with many of them before. They knew my work. They trusted my judgment. That trust mattered more than any title. Her father arrived last. When he walked in, the room shifted slightly, not because of fear, but respect. He had built that over decades. He greeted everyone warmly, then sat at the head of the table. He looked at me and nodded once. The meeting began. He spoke about transition, about health, about the future of the company. His words were steady, honest, not dramatic. He did not pretend he would stay forever. He did not pretend he was irreplaceable. Then he paused. "There comes a time," he said, "when leadership must pass to hands that can carry it forward without ego." He looked around the table. "I believe we have found those hands." He turned toward me. "For years," he continued, "this man has worked quietly, effectively, and with integrity. He has fixed problems others avoided. He has spoken truth when silence would have been easier." The room was completely still now. "I am proud to announce," he said, "that he will be stepping in as the new chief executive officer." For a moment, nothing happened. Then came polite applause, controlled, professional. I stood slowly. I did not smile widely. I did not raise my voice. I simply thanked them. "I do not promise perfection," I said, "only honesty, effort, and responsibility." That was all. The meeting ended shortly after. People shook my hand, offered congratulations, asked questions. I answered calmly. Midday internal emails were sent. By afternoon, news traveled faster than I expected, and by evening, the truth reached my family. I was at home when my phone rang. My son's name lit up the screen. "Dad," he said, his voice unsure, "is it true?" "Yes," I replied gently. There was a long pause. "You're the CEO?" he asked. "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "That's okay," I replied. "I didn't need you to." He laughed softly, not out of humor. Out of disbelief. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I really am." That mattered. Then his voice shifted slightly. "She's surprised," he added. "I imagine so," I said. He hesitated. "She feels bad," he said, "about some things." I closed my eyes for a moment. "Tell her she doesn't owe me anything," I replied. "Just honesty going forward." That evening my phone rang again. This time it was her father. "News travels fast," he said. "Yes," I replied. There was satisfaction in his voice, but not arrogance. "She didn't know," he said. "No," I agreed. "She's struggling with it," he admitted. "Not because of the role, because of what it says about her judgment." I said nothing. "Give her time," he added. "I will," I replied. The next few days were interesting. I attended meetings, signed documents, made decisions, led calmly. The company responded well. Staff morale improved. Clarity has a way of calming people. Same time, the family dynamic shifted. When I visited my son, his wife was different, quieter, more careful with her words. She watched me closely now, not with judgment but confusion. One evening she finally spoke. "I didn't know," she said, standing awkwardly in the kitchen. "I know," I replied. She swallowed. "I said something at the wedding," she continued. "Something unkind." I looked at her calmly. "Yes," I said, her eyes filled slightly. "I'm sorry," she said. "I judged you without knowing you." I nodded slowly. "Judgment is easy," I replied. "Understanding takes effort." She looked down. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said. "I believe you," I replied, "but intent doesn't erase impact." She nodded. "I see that now," she said. We stood there in silence. Then I added, "This isn't about my position. It never was." She looked up, surprised. "It's about how we treat people when we think they don't matter," I said. Her shoulders dropped slightly. "I was wrong," she whispered. "Yes," I replied gently, "you were." There was no anger in my voice, only truth. Over time, her behavior changed, not overnight. Change rarely happens that way, but slowly, consistently. She listened more, she spoke less. She asked questions, real ones. I did not demand respect, I let my actions speak. At work, I led the same way I always had, quietly, fairly, with accountability. At home, I remained the same father, the same man. What surprised me most was how uncomfortable people became when they realized how wrong they had been about me. Not just her, others too. Some apologized, some avoided me, some pretended nothing had changed. I did not chase any reaction. One evening, my son sat beside me. "I never really asked you," he said, "why you never talked about your work." I smiled softly. "Because it wasn't who I was," I replied. "It was just what I did." He nodded. "I'm glad you're finally being seen," he said. I looked at him. "I was always seen," I replied, "just not by everyone." That night, as I sat alone again, I reflected on how strange justice can be. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, no confrontations, no revenge, no raised voices, only truth arriving when it was ready. And in that truth, something deeper began to heal, not pride, not ego, but understanding. In the days that followed, I noticed small changes that said more than words ever could. At the office, people became more careful around me, not afraid, just aware. Some who once spoke over me now waited for my thoughts. Others who had ignored my emails before now replied within minutes. I did not take satisfaction in this. It only reminded me how easily respect is misplaced. One afternoon, as I walked through the hallway, I overheard two junior employees whispering. "He doesn't act like a CEO," one said. "That's why he is one," the other replied. I kept walking. At home, change came more slowly. One evening, my daughter-in-law stood in the doorway while I was preparing tea. She hesitated, as if deciding whether to speak or stay silent. "May I sit with you?" she asked. "Yes," I said. She sat across from me, folding her hands the way nervous people do. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, "about how I grew up, about what I was taught to value." I listened. "In my world," she continued, "power was loud, success was visible. If someone didn't look important, we assumed they were." I nodded gently. "That belief cost me something," she said. "It cost me my dignity that day." She did not cry, she did not dramatize it, she simply spoke. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added. "I just want you to know I see you now." I took a slow breath. "Seeing is the first step," I replied. "What matters is what you do after." She nodded. "I want to do better," she said. I believed her. Not because of her words, but because of her discomfort. Growth often feels uncomfortable. Later that night, my son called me. "I didn't realize how much pressure you lived under," he said, "how much you carried quietly." I smiled to myself. "That's a parent's job," I replied. "No," he said, "it was your choice, and I respect that." We spoke for a long time about life, about expectations, about the kind of people we want to be. When the call ended, I sat in the quiet again. But this time the quiet felt different, lighter. I realized something important then. Power did not heal the wound. Apologies did not erase it either. What healed it was understanding, slow, honest, uncomfortable understanding. I had not been lifted up by a title. Others had simply been brought closer to the ground. And in that space where no one stood above another, real respect finally had room to grow. Life after the announcement settled into an unexpected rhythm. The company was larger and more complex than I had imagined. People expected direction. They needed clarity. They needed stability. I provided it quietly, steadily, without seeking recognition or applause. It was strange to be in a position of authority that I had never wanted for myself. Yet here I was, responsible for hundreds of employees, their livelihoods, and the trust of someone I had never truly known personally until now. Some days were easy, some were exhausting. Decisions came faster than my ability to analyze them. Meetings stretched for hours, paperwork seemed endless, and yet in the quiet moments I found satisfaction, not because of power, but because problems that had plagued others for years were being solved one by one. I noticed the staff watching me differently. The quiet ones who had always worked diligently without recognition now spoke up in meetings. Their suggestions were sharper, their confidence more visible. Some colleagues who had previously dismissed me as inexperienced now came to me for advice. It was subtle, not loud. A nod, a careful glance, a small acknowledgement that said, "We see you." The most interesting changes were at home. My daughter in law, the same young woman who had whispered her careless insult at my son's wedding, had begun to observe me in ways she could not hide. She was polite before, but now her curiosity and hesitation were coupled with a quiet, almost cautious respect. One evening, she appeared in the kitchen while I was cleaning up after dinner. She looked uncomfortable. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her voice low. "Of course," I replied, not looking up from the dishes. "About the company and your role," she said. She paused, then added, "I didn't realize." I dried my hands and looked at her directly. "It's all right," I said. "You didn't know." She swallowed and studied the floor. I judged you wrongly," she admitted softly. I nodded. We all judge sometimes without thinking. What matters is what we do once we see the truth. Her eyes met mine. There was no defiance now, only understanding forming slowly. She nodded once and then left without saying more. I thought about her words long after she left. Change rarely comes in the form of sudden apologies. It is gradual, it is internal, and it is far more powerful than anger or confrontation. My son noticed it too. He came to me one evening while we were reviewing some company reports together. "You know," he said quietly, "I've never really seen you this way before, not just at work, but in general." I paused. "Seen me how?" I asked. "Strong," he said, "quietly strong, steady. You handle things differently than anyone else I know. You don't need to show it, and yet everyone notices." I smiled softly. "Strength doesn't need an audience," I replied. "It's often quiet, but it carries more weight than loudness ever can." That night I sat alone and reflected. Life had a strange way of balancing itself. Moments of humiliation and shame, like the one at the wedding, seemed to fade when they were met with patience and humility. The truth had arrived quietly, and it was reshaping relationships without anyone needing to raise their voice. Even my daughter-in-law began small gestures that showed awareness. She would ask for advice on minor matters, consult me quietly about choices she needed to make, and listen attentively when I spoke. She didn't flaunt it. She didn't apologize theatrically. She simply adjusted her behavior. The realization of her misjudgment had settled in, and that was enough. Work continued to demand my attention, and each day taught me patience in unexpected ways. Some employees resisted my authority initially. They questioned minor changes. They tested limits. I did not react with anger. I listened. I responded with clarity, fairness, and calm reasoning. By the end of each challenge, they recognized not only the correctness of the decision, but the dignity in the way it was delivered. I also noticed subtle changes in my own perspective. I had once feared confrontation and avoided visibility, but now I understood that quiet consistency could influence more than aggression ever could. Respect, when earned slowly, is stronger than any title or superficial power. The evolving dynamic with my daughter-in-law became more apparent during family gatherings. At first, she sat politely, careful with her words, often observing before speaking. But over time, she began to interact differently. Questions replaced assumptions. Curiosity replaced judgment. She began to recognize my knowledge and experience, not because I demanded recognition, but because she had the space to witness it firsthand. One afternoon, she stayed behind after a family visit. We were alone in the living room. The atmosphere was quiet, tense with unspoken thoughts. "I've been thinking about that day at the wedding," she said softly. I nodded. "I know." She looked down at her hands. "I acted thoughtlessly. I said things I shouldn't have, and I want to do better." "Actions matter more than words," I replied gently. "What you do from this moment forward is what truly counts." She met my gaze. There was humility there now, not forced, not performative, real. I nodded and returned to my chair. The next weeks brought more subtle shifts. Employees who had once doubted my leadership started seeking guidance. My daughter in law quietly observed these interactions. She noticed how colleagues respected quiet authority, how patience and fairness often carried more weight than loud confidence. Her admiration was not spoken aloud yet, but I could sense it. At home, our family dinners changed. Conversations became more inclusive. Her laughter was softer, more genuine. She asked questions about my experiences, about life lessons I had learned quietly over the years. I answered honestly, never bragging, only sharing what I believed could help. One evening, after a long day of meetings, my son came to me privately. "Dad," he said, "I never realized how much you managed on your own, how much patience you have, how much wisdom." "I did what I had to do," I said simply. "You did more than that," he insisted. "You shaped the way I see the world. You didn't just provide, you guided without expecting recognition." We sat in silence for a while. I understood then that the ripples of quiet influence were far greater than the impact of visible authority. Even my daughter in law began small gestures that reflected her growth. She would consult me on minor decisions, listen attentively to my advice, and observe before acting. Her transformation was subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable to those who knew her well. At the company, I noticed employees becoming more confident. They collaborated more freely. Decisions were implemented more efficiently. The culture began to shift quietly but unmistakably. People learned that respect was earned through consistency, fairness, and humility, not through aggression or self promotion. One morning, her father called me privately. "She's learning," he said quietly. "Not quickly, but truly. She's realizing what it means to respect someone before knowing their power." "Yes," I replied. "Respect is not about position, it's about integrity." He paused. "Thank you for handling this with dignity." "I had no other choice," I said. "It wasn't about her words at the wedding, it was about guiding her to understand them." He smiled. "And you did." Over time, the household itself became calmer. Conversations were patient. Mistakes were acknowledged without shame. Learning became the focus instead of appearances. My presence at the dinner table no longer carried tension. Instead, it became grounding. People sought my input not out of fear, but out of trust. At night, when the house was quiet, I often reflected on these changes. How strange it was to move from humiliation to influence without raising my voice or seeking revenge. How powerful patience and clarity can be when exercised consistently. How respect, once earned, becomes enduring. The journey had not been easy. The words at the wedding had cut deep, but those words had forced reflection, not only in her, but also in me. I had learned to respond with composure. She had learned that judgment without knowledge is fragile, and together, silently, we had rebuilt trust. I realized then that power, when wielded quietly, can transform more than anger or authority ever could. Influence does not require intimidation. Leadership does not require display. And family bonds, when nurtured with patience and understanding, can grow even stronger after they are tested. And so the weeks passed. The daughter in law continued to evolve in small, deliberate ways. The company thrived under quiet, steady leadership. My son watched, learning lessons that I had once hoped to pass down quietly, and I remained myself, consistent, calm, and focused on the truth rather than appearances. The ripples of patience and integrity began to reach farther than anyone could see, and in those ripples I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that real change, subtle, meaningful, and enduring, had begun. The days following the first weeks of my leadership felt like walking through a quiet storm. Everything was moving, decisions were being made, and yet the atmosphere remained calm, almost deceptively peaceful. I had learned that influence often works in silence, and this was a lesson the company and my family was slowly beginning to understand. At home, the subtle shifts in behavior from my daughter in law became more noticeable. One morning, she joined me in the living room as I reviewed some personal notes I kept about work strategies and family plans. She didn't speak at first. She simply observed, folding her hands and sitting quietly on the edge of the couch. "You have a way of looking at things that I don't understand yet," she said finally, her voice soft. I smiled lightly. "You will. Understanding takes time. You don't see everything at once." She nodded, thoughtful. I realized I've been so focused on appearances that I missed a lot about people, about integrity. I leaned back in my chair. Integrity isn't always visible. Sometimes it's in the quiet moments, the small actions, the choices no one notices. She studied my face. I see that now. I wish I could go back and say what I should have said that day. You don't need to, I said calmly. What matters is what you do moving forward. That evening, my son joined us. The three of us sat together over a simple dinner, and I watched as his wife's words became more thoughtful, her questions more genuine. She was learning not to react based on assumptions, but to listen first. It was a subtle transformation, yet I could feel its weight. In the office, the change was equally noticeable. Employees who had once been hesitant to voice opinions now approached me with ideas, seeking guidance rather than validation. Even those who had previously questioned my decisions began to defer to my judgment, not out of fear, but because they had come to recognize my consistency. One afternoon, I walked past a meeting where my daughter-in-law's colleagues were discussing a joint project involving our company. She was present as a representative of her family, and I noticed her glancing toward me several times. Each time, her expression softened. I did not address it, nor did she acknowledge it outwardly. Yet the subtle awareness was there. She had started to observe not just me, but the way respect and leadership intertwined. Back at home, one quiet evening, she approached me again. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said hesitantly. "Of course," I replied, setting down my cup of tea. "I've been thinking about my words at the wedding," she began. "The way I judged you, it felt careless, but it also came from a place of insecurity, I think. I wanted to prove I understood my world. And I didn't stop to consider yours." I nodded slowly. "We all carry insecurities. They often speak before reason does. The important thing is to recognize them and make a choice to act differently." She swallowed, then said quietly, "I want to act differently." "You already are," I said softly. "Actions will speak louder than words always." Her expression changed. A small, genuine smile appeared, a smile that reflected growth rather than apology. I realized that humility, once it is embraced internally, doesn't need to be announced. It shows naturally, quietly in small gestures. Meanwhile, at work, challenges continued. One of the departments resisted a structural change I had implemented. There were complaints, passive resistance, and subtle questioning of my authority. I could have reacted with impatience or frustration, but I had learned the value of quiet composure. I called a meeting with the department heads. I listened first, understanding their concerns fully. Then I explained my reasoning, step by step, calmly, ensuring clarity without belittling anyone. By the end of the discussion, the resistance softened. They didn't necessarily love the changes yet, but they understood the logic behind them, and they respected the way it had been presented. The daughter-in-law observed this from the side during a visit to the office. I noticed her watching closely, noting how respect was earned through patience and consistency rather than demands or intimidation. It was a lesson she had never fully appreciated before. One evening, my son and I sat together in the quiet of our living room after a long day. "Dad," he said softly, "I think I understand now what you've been trying to show me all these years. Not just about work, about life." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, about patience, about integrity, about quiet strength. How to carry yourself even when others don't notice. How to respond without anger even when you're hurt. I see it in you now." I smiled, a little tired but proud. "It's not easy, but it's necessary. Life often tests us in ways we don't expect, and sometimes the most important victories are invisible." He nodded thoughtfully. "I think she's starting to understand that too." "Yes," I said, "she is, but it takes time. Real change always does." The weeks turned into months. My daughter-in-law began to take more initiative in conversations, asking for advice rather than making assumptions. She began consulting me on small matters, listening carefully to my guidance, and implementing decisions with thoughtfulness. Her gestures of respect were subtle but consistent. It was clear she had internalized the lessons quietly, privately, without seeking recognition. Even her father noticed the change. One afternoon, he called me after observing her approach a challenging situation at work. "She handled that perfectly," he said quietly. "I see now she's learning from you more than I expected, not just how to manage, but how to think and observe. She's changing in ways I never could have forced." I nodded, though he could not see me. "Change cannot be forced, it must be witnessed and embraced, and she is doing that now." He paused, then added, "Thank you for your patience." for showing her the right way without making her feel small. It wasn't about making her feel small, I replied. It was about helping her see. By the end of that year, the family dynamics had shifted entirely. The daughter in law's respect became natural, unspoken, and evident in the way she treated everyone, not just me. Conversations were more thoughtful, decisions were made collaboratively. The home, once tense after the wedding incident, had become calmer, warmer, and filled with trust rather than fear or judgment. At work, the staff grew more confident and proactive. Meetings flowed more efficiently. Employees learned that respect was earned through action, not title. Their loyalty and trust became the foundation for a stronger, healthier company culture. I often reflected on how strange life can be. One careless insult, spoken in a moment of thoughtlessness, had the potential to create tension and pain. And yet, with patience, humility, and quiet integrity, that same situation had become a teaching moment, not just for her, but for everyone involved. I realized that the journey from judgment to understanding is never quick. It is not always dramatic. It is measured in small, consistent acts, in quiet observation, in listening more than speaking, and in leading without demanding recognition. And in that realization, I found peace. The daughter in law had transformed in ways that mattered, not for appearances, not for ego, but for true understanding. The company had grown stronger, not because of aggressive leadership, but because of careful, deliberate guidance. My son had matured in his perception of people and values, and I quietly had fulfilled my role not through displays of power, but through patience, presence, and integrity. The wedding insult, which had once cut deeply, now felt like a distant echo. It no longer carried shame or humiliation. Instead, it had become the catalyst for growth, reflection, and transformation for all of us. In those quiet months, I understood a deeper truth. Influence is not measured by what others see immediately. It is measured by the lasting change that is quietly, steadily, and consistently created. And that change, once rooted, touches more lives than any loud declaration ever could. It was the first day the company made the announcement publicly. I arrived at the office early as always. The air was filled with quiet anticipation, though outwardly everything seemed normal. Employees greeted me politely, some with smiles, others with careful glances. I understood why. Titles change perception, even if the person behind them remains the same. The press release had gone out in the morning. By midday, news outlets were discussing the appointment. Headlines described me as the new CEO, highlighting my work ethic and reputation for problem solving. My son called during lunch, almost laughing nervously. "Dad, people are talking," he said. "Everyone at work, everyone online, it's a big deal." I smiled gently. "It's only a big deal to those who focus on appearances. For me, it's just another day to do my job." He laughed softly, then added, "I think she's realizing it too." I knew who he meant. My daughter-in-law had been quiet that morning. She observed the unfolding recognition from a distance, without comment. That in itself was a sign. Her reactions had become subtle but genuine. She no longer needed to test boundaries. She was absorbing lessons quietly. The board meeting later that afternoon was the first real test of my public role. Everyone in the room was aware that the leadership had changed. Expectations were high, questions were pointed, and skepticism lingered in subtle glances. I addressed each concern with calm reasoning, carefully explaining processes, sharing data, and outlining future steps. By the end of the meeting, nods replaced hesitation. Quiet acknowledgments replaced whispered doubts. The subtle shift in respect was palpable. People recognized consistency, reliability, and the absence of ego. Influence, I realized, is often stronger when it is quiet. After work, my son invited me home for a small family dinner. I agreed. The day had been long and the house promised a return to calm. When I arrived, the atmosphere was slightly tense. She was in the kitchen arranging plates. I could see her glancing at me hesitant. It was a new kind of observation, one that had replaced judgment with consideration. "Good evening," I said softly. She nodded. "Good evening," she replied carefully. During dinner, conversations were polite but cautious. Small jokes, gentle laughter, careful topics. I noticed how she watched me as I spoke, noticing subtleties she had overlooked before. The same woman who had insulted me at the wedding was now learning humility and awareness in a quiet, steady way. After dinner, she approached me while I was clearing the table. "May I speak with you?" she asked softly. Of course, I replied. I want to apologize again, she said, her voice low and sincere. Not just for the wedding, for how I've acted before. I misjudged you. I nodded slowly. I know, I said. And I appreciate your honesty, but apologies are only meaningful if paired with action. You're showing that already. She looked down, then up quietly. I want to do better, she whispered. You are, I said simply. It's evident. At that moment, my son joined us. He smiled softly, noticing the exchange. I think she's finally seeing what I always knew, he said quietly. Yes, I agreed. Seeing is the first step. Understanding comes next. The evening continued quietly. He spoke about simple things, plans for the weekend, work updates, minor household matters. No heavy topics, no confrontation, just observation, reflection, and presence. The subtle, patient rebuilding of respect was more powerful than any verbal apology could have been. Later that week, an unexpected event tested this new dynamic. One of the senior managers made a public comment questioning a decision I had implemented. Nothing aggressive, just cautious doubt. I called him into my office. I did not raise my voice. I listened carefully as he expressed his concerns. Then I explained the reasoning behind the decision, step by step. I invited him to share alternative ideas if he had any. By the end of the conversation, he nodded, visibly relieved. I understand now, he said. I see the logic and I respect the approach. I realized then how much subtle influence matters. People respond not to authority alone, but to patience, clarity, and integrity. The daughter-in-law, present in the office that afternoon, observed quietly. She noticed how respect was earned through understanding, not fear. That evening, my son and I spoke again. Dad, it's amazing to watch her change, he said. It's not instant, but it's real. Yes, I replied. Change is rarely instant. Growth takes time and observation. The lessons we learn quietly often last the longest. We sat in silence, both reflecting on how far things had come. The words at the wedding, which had once caused embarrassment and hurt, were now a distant memory, replaced by patient understanding and genuine respect. The next few weeks brought further lessons in subtle transformation. At home, the daughter-in-law's attitude continued to shift. She no longer questioned my decisions or made assumptions. Instead, she observed, listened, and sought advice when necessary. One evening, she came to me while I was reviewing documents in the study. I ask you about something, she said quietly. Of course, I replied. It's about leadership, about how you manage people, she began. I've been thinking I judged too quickly at the wedding, and I realize now that real leadership isn't about showing off power. It's about presence, integrity, and understanding. I nodded slowly. You've understood that. Observing quietly is often the first step toward learning. She hesitated, then said softly, I want to apply that in my life, at work, at home. I don't want to repeat my mistakes. You already have started, I said gently. Your actions will show it more than words ever could. My son, who had been listening from the doorway, smiled. I'm proud of you both, he said. Seeing this change is encouraging. She looked at him, then back at me. Thank you, she said quietly. It struck me then how patience and consistency can slowly reshape relationships. The wound from the wedding insult, though it had stung, became a catalyst for reflection, not just for her, but for our family as a whole. At work, the pattern was similar. Employees noticed the consistency in my approach, the absence of ego, and the fairness in my decisions. Challenges arose, of course. One department resisted a new procedural change. Rather than responding with authority alone, I asked questions, listened to concerns, and invited solutions. By the end of the discussion, the resistance softened and collaboration replaced skepticism. I realized that real respect is earned not through titles, but through the combination of calm authority and consideration. People are more likely to follow someone who demonstrates both understanding and fairness. During one particularly long meeting, I noticed my daughter-in-law observing quietly from the side. She had accompanied her father to the office that day. She watched my interactions carefully, noting how influence could be exercised without intimidation. Later, she approached me privately. I've been learning from you, she said softly. I didn't know it before, but I see now how patience and quiet guidance can lead to respect. You are learning, I replied, and that understanding is already showing in your actions. She smiled, a genuine, small smile. It was no longer hesitant or forced. There was recognition in her eyes, a sign that she understood the difference between fleeting impressions and true influence. That evening, my son and I spoke at length about the subtle changes. Dad, it's remarkable to see how she's growing, he said. I never realized how much words at a wedding could affect someone or how much patience could heal it. Words can wound quickly, I said, but consistent action and calm guidance have the power to repair, even in ways we might not notice immediately. He nodded thoughtfully. I see now why you handled everything quietly. You didn't need to react in anger. You allowed space for understanding. Yes, I replied. Rushing to judgment or retaliation only prolongs conflict. Observing, listening, and responding with integrity creates lasting change. Weeks turned into months. The daughter-in-law's respect became more apparent in everyday interactions. She consulted me on decisions both big and small. Her words became measured, her behavior intentional. There was no need for confrontation or reminders. The lessons were absorbed quietly and naturally. At the company, similar patterns emerged. Employees who had been skeptical began to follow guidance not out of fear but out of trust. Problems that once caused tension were solved more efficiently. Meetings flowed more smoothly, and collaboration increased. It was clear that leadership exercised with integrity and patience could shift the culture without force. One afternoon, her father called me privately. She's learning, he said softly, not immediately, but meaningfully. She's seeing the impact of how you handle people. She's changing because of example, not instruction. Yes, I replied, true change is never forced. It must be witnessed and internalized. She's learning that now. He paused. Thank you for guiding her without humiliation, for showing her respect even when she was unaware of her mistakes. It wasn't about punishment, I said. It was about understanding. She needed to see, not be scolded. He smiled. And you succeeded. As the months passed, the household became warmer. Conversations were thoughtful. Decisions were considered. The air of judgment had lifted. The small but deliberate adjustments made by my daughter-in-law, combined with the family's evolving respect for quiet strength, created a calmer, more supportive environment. At work, challenges continued, of course. Not every employee agreed with every decision, yet the culture had shifted. People trusted the process, trusted the reasoning, and respected the way decisions were communicated. They noticed that integrity and patience carried far more weight than displays of power or authority. Even small gestures mattered. A thank you note from a team member, a quiet acknowledgement of effort, a thoughtful question all contributed to the growing trust and respect. These small acts were far more meaningful than any public recognition could be. One evening, after returning home from a particularly challenging day at the office, I sat alone and reflected. I thought about the wedding insult, the words that had once wounded me deeply. At the time, they had seemed humiliating, unfair, and harsh. But looking back, I realized they had sparked a chain of reflection, growth, and understanding that would not have occurred otherwise. Patience, integrity, and quiet influence had transformed the situation. The daughter-in-law had matured. My son had witnessed the lessons of leadership and respect firsthand. The company culture had strengthened, and I had learned once again the value of calm, deliberate action in the face of misunderstanding. It was clear that true influence does not come from authority alone. It comes from consistency, fairness, and integrity. It comes from allowing others to witness the difference between impulsive judgment and thoughtful guidance. And it comes from patience, the kind that waits for understanding to arrive on its own terms. Looking back on those weeks, I realized how much had changed, not because of confrontation, but because of quiet observation, reflection, and subtle guidance. The daughter-in-law, once careless and judgmental, was now thoughtful and aware. The family dynamic had shifted toward mutual respect, and the company had become stronger, steadier, and more collaborative. The lesson was clear: real transformation rarely occurs through words alone. It is cultivated through action, consistency, and integrity. And when those values are upheld quietly, without need for recognition, their impact is lasting and profound. The months passed quietly, but the subtle changes in my family were remarkable. Each day, I noticed small gestures from my daughter-in-law that had once been absent. She no longer questioned me casually or made assumptions about my intentions. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, her words were thoughtful. It was a shift that required no dramatic announcement. It was simply present, felt in the rhythm of daily life. One evening, I returned home from the office and found her sitting alone in the living room. The soft light of the lamp highlighted her expression, which was tentative yet sincere. "May I talk to you?" she asked, her voice quiet. "Of course," I replied, setting my briefcase down and taking a seat across from her. "I've been reflecting," she said slowly, "on how I treated you, not just at the wedding, but before that and even after. I see now that my judgments were shallow and my words were careless. I hurt you without understanding, and I feel ashamed of that." I remained calm, letting her speak without interruption. She looked down at her hands for a moment, then met my gaze again. "I want to be better," she continued, "not just for appearances, not just because it matters to others, but because it matters to me. I want to grow into someone who understands people before judging them." I nodded slowly. Acknowledging the mistake is the first step. Actions that follow are what truly show growth. She hesitated, then said quietly, "I hope you can forgive me." I smiled gently. "Forgiveness is already present. I do not hold grudges. What matters is that you are learning and making an effort to act with awareness. That is enough." A quiet relief washed over her face. I could see the tension that had been present since the wedding began to ease. That moment was not about authority or titles or past mistakes. It was about recognition and understanding. Over the following weeks, the change became more consistent. She began to consult me on personal and professional decisions alike, asking questions that reflected careful thought. She listened attentively when I offered guidance and integrated that understanding into her own actions. At the office, the company began to feel the effects of stability and patience. Employees who had resisted earlier decisions now participated proactively. Teams collaborated more effectively. The culture of quiet respect had taken root. People were learning that authority does not require aggression, guidance does not require loudness. Consistency, integrity, and calm reasoning were now the markers of influence. One morning, my son approached me privately after a board meeting. "Dad," he said, "I've noticed how she's changed, not just in how she treats you, but how she interacts with others. She's becoming more thoughtful, more aware, more considerate. It's remarkable." "Yes," I said softly. Growth often appears in small, almost imperceptible ways. That is why patience is so important. He nodded thoughtfully. "I think I finally understand what you've been showing us all along. Leadership and influence aren't about being seen or heard first. They're about integrity, consistency, and guiding others by example." "That understanding is invaluable," I replied. "It lasts longer than any temporary authority or recognition ever could." Later that day, my daughter-in-law approached me again. This time, she held a small folder of personal notes she had prepared, questions about company strategy, personal reflections, and requests for advice. "I've been taking notes," she said softly. "I want to understand more about how to think critically, make decisions, and act responsibly." I smiled, recognizing both her humility and her earnest desire to grow. That is a meaningful step. Reflection and observation will take you far further than words alone. The relationship continued to evolve in quiet, meaningful ways. At home, she became more participatory in family discussions, no longer hesitant or defensive. Conversations were measured, thoughtful, and inclusive. At work, she began taking initiative on projects with subtle guidance, and her approach reflected a maturity that had been absent before. The change was real, and I saw it not just in words, but in her actions. One evening, we sat together in the living room discussing family plans for the upcoming holiday. The atmosphere was calm. She spoke thoughtfully, weighing options and asking for input, not seeking to assert control, but to learn. "I never realized," she said softly, "how much I can learn by listening first. I always thought knowledge was shown by speaking, by demonstrating what I knew. I see now that understanding comes first." "You've already demonstrated that understanding," I replied. "Learning how to act on it takes time, but you are on the right path." She smiled, the tension from months of misunderstanding finally easing. "I want to continue growing," she said. "I don't want to repeat my past mistakes." "You won't," I said gently. "Not if you continue to act with awareness, humility, and patience. That combination is stronger than any title or position." The weeks that followed reinforced the subtle but meaningful progress. At home, the family dynamic became smoother, warmer, and more supportive. My son noticed the transformation as well. Dad, he said one evening, it's amazing to watch how everything has changed. The way she speaks to you, to others, the patience, the respect. I think we're all learning from each other. Yes, I said softly, respect and understanding grow quietly. They do not announce themselves, but they endure longer than any loud declaration. The company continued to thrive under the quiet, steady guidance that had become my hallmark. Employees respected decisions not because they came from the CEO, but because they were consistently fair, thoughtful, and well reasoned. Mistakes were addressed constructively, and challenges were met with calm problem solving rather than conflict. One afternoon, I called a private meeting with my daughter in law. I want to share something with you, I said gently. I've noticed your growth not just in how you treat me, but in your approach to life and work. That is significant. The ability to reflect, listen, and act thoughtfully is rare. Her eyes widened slightly, but there was humility in her gaze. Thank you, she whispered. I've tried to be better, to learn from my mistakes. You are, I said, and that growth will carry you farther than anything else. Influence and respect are earned, not demanded. You've already begun to show both. She nodded slowly, absorbing the words. I feel lighter, she said quietly. It's like a weight I didn't realize I was carrying has been lifted. I don't need to prove myself constantly. I just need to observe and act responsibly. That realization is powerful, I said softly. It shows maturity and understanding. At that moment, I realized that the journey we had all taken, from the harsh words of the wedding to this quiet harmony, was not just about mistakes or recognition. It was about reflection, growth, and patient observation. We had moved from misunderstanding to genuine understanding, from hurt to respect, from judgment to quiet admiration. The daughter in law's transformation influenced the entire household. Conversations became more thoughtful, decisions more considered, and the atmosphere calmer. Laughter returned, softer and more genuine. Trust replaced hesitation. The subtle, deliberate changes showed that patience and integrity were far more effective than confrontation or force. At work, similar lessons were apparent. Employees no longer followed directives blindly. They participated thoughtfully, collaborating and contributing ideas with confidence. Respect was no longer demanded. It had been earned quietly, steadily, and meaningfully. One evening, I reflected on the journey. The words at the wedding, which had once caused embarrassment and hurt, were now a distant memory. They had become the catalyst for growth, understanding, and transformation for my daughter in law, my son, the company, and myself. Patience, consistency, humility, and integrity had changed the trajectory of our relationships. The daughter in law's respect was no longer tentative or fearful, it was genuine. She had learned to observe, reflect, and act with thoughtfulness. The household had become warmer, calmer, and more supportive, and the company culture had strengthened in ways that would endure far beyond the immediate leadership changes. The lessons were clear. True influence comes not from shouting, demanding, or punishing, but from quiet consistency, fairness, and integrity. Change and growth require patience, observation, and deliberate action. The journey from misunderstanding to respect may be slow, but its effects are lasting. As I sat in the quiet of my home that night, I realized that the ripple effects of calm guidance extend far beyond what is immediately visible. Words spoken in haste can wound, but patient reflection and steady integrity can heal, inspire, and transform in ways that are profound and enduring. The family, the company, and I had all moved forward together, learning lessons that would shape us for years to come. And in that quiet understanding, there was peace, there was hope. And there was the quiet satisfaction of seeing growth, patience, and respect blossom where they had once seemed impossible. As the weeks turned into months, the house became a place of quiet harmony. The tension that had once lingered, sharp and uncomfortable, had dissolved almost imperceptibly. My daughter in law, who had once spoken careless words that wounded me deeply, now carried herself with a calm awareness that reflected true growth. She no longer needed to assert herself or prove anything. Her respect was genuine, earned through observation, reflection, and thoughtful action. I often watched her quietly during family moments, how she listened, how she considered others' feelings, and how she participated without the need for attention. It was subtle, almost invisible, but unmistakable. I realized then how much of life's lessons are carried silently. Words may leave marks, but actions, repeated over time, leave lasting impressions. My son noticed the changes too. One evening, as we were having a quiet dinner together, he said softly, "Dad, I've learned so much from watching you, not just about leadership, but about patience, humility, and dignity. And I've noticed how she's learning too." I smiled gently. Growth isn't immediate, it doesn't announce itself loudly, it happens quietly in small, consistent ways. He nodded, looking thoughtful. I see that now. I see that respect and understanding carry far more weight than anger or confrontation ever could. That night, I reflected on the journey from the sharp words at the wedding through the weeks of adjustment to the present quiet understanding. I realized that the real impact of that moment had not been humiliation or embarrassment, but the opportunity for learning. It had forced reflection, both in her and in me, and it had shown us all the power of patience, integrity, and calm guidance. The company, too, had transformed in small but meaningful ways. Employees who had once doubted my leadership now approached decisions with confidence and collaboration. They respected guidance that was consistent, fair, and thoughtful. The workplace had become more efficient, but more importantly, it had become more humane. People felt heard, valued, and trusted. I realized that influence, exercised with integrity rather than force, shapes not only outcomes but hearts and minds. One afternoon, my daughter in law came to me quietly while I was reviewing company documents. "May I speak with you?" she asked. "Of course," I replied. "I wanted to say thank you," she said softly, "not just for forgiveness, but for showing me a better way. You didn't react with anger. You didn't humiliate me. You led with patience, and I've learned from that." I nodded, feeling a warmth that was difficult to express. The lessons you learn quietly are often the ones that last the longest. "You've shown growth, awareness, and understanding. That is all that matters." She smiled, a genuine small smile. "I feel lighter. I feel like I can start fresh, not as someone who judges, but as someone who observes, listens, and learns. I want to continue growing in work, in family, in life." "That path is always worth following," I said gently. "Growth is continuous. Mistakes will happen, but how you respond to them defines the journey." The home had become a place of trust and support. Conversations were thoughtful, laughter was genuine, and respect was evident in every interaction. My son had grown in understanding, witnessing not only the change in his wife, but also the lessons of patience and integrity in action. My daughter in law had embraced humility and awareness, and the bond within our family had strengthened quietly but profoundly. Looking back, I realized the power of one simple truth: change cannot be forced, and respect cannot be demanded. Both must be earned, witnessed, and nurtured over time. Anger and humiliation may cause temporary reactions, but patience, consistency, and integrity create lasting transformation. I also reflected on my own journey. The wedding insult, which had initially wounded me deeply, had become a catalyst for reflection and growth. It taught me that humility in the face of thoughtlessness is not weakness, but strength. It showed me that the quiet approach, grounded in understanding, often has the most profound impact. And it reminded me that forgiveness, coupled with guidance, can change the course of relationships far more than punishment ever could. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, the atmosphere was calm and warm. She spoke thoughtfully, my son listened attentively, and I observed quietly, feeling a sense of satisfaction that went beyond pride. It was the satisfaction of knowing that patience, understanding, and integrity had worked, not as abstract principles, but as lived, experienced reality. In that quiet, I realized the lesson I had carried all along. Influence is not in what you demand, but in what you demonstrate. Leadership is not in loud declarations, but in consistent, fair, and thoughtful action. Respect grows slowly, nurtured by patience, humility, and integrity. And forgiveness given sincerely can heal wounds and transform hearts. I smiled softly to myself. Life had a way of turning even painful moments into lessons that shaped the future. The words at the wedding, once a source of shame and embarrassment, had become a turning point not for anger but for growth. And in that growth, we all found a deeper understanding, a more thoughtful approach to life, and a quiet hope for the future. As I watched my daughter in law quietly assisting my son with a small task, I felt the weight of the past lift. The house was filled with calm, respectful energy. It was not perfect, and it never would be, but it was real, it was grounded, and it was full of potential. I realized that the greatest lessons come not from dramatic confrontations, but from consistent, deliberate action over time. Life will always present moments that challenge patience, dignity, and understanding. How we respond shapes not only our own character, but the environment and people around us. And so I embraced the quiet warmth of that evening, reflecting on the journey from misunderstanding to understanding, from judgment to respect, and from conflict to quiet harmony. The path had been long, sometimes painful, but it had brought wisdom, patience, and hope. The lesson was simple: treat others with integrity, lead with patience, forgive sincerely, and act consistently. True change is not instant, but it is enduring. The bond within a family, the trust within a workplace, and the respect earned through humility and understanding are treasures that last far longer than fleeting words or temporary judgments. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace. Life had turned a moment of humiliation into a journey of growth, learning, and reconciliation. And in that transformation, I found hope, warmth, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing that patience, understanding, and integrity had shaped a better future for all of us.